Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of Cricket Scorers Untallied, where I'm joined, as in previous episodes, by Julia Farman. Hello.
Hello.
And Brian Rodwell.
Hello.
Jules, last week you were telling us that your dice game was cancelled because Zoom stopped play. Have you managed to actually score a dice game since then?
Yep, I have just come fresh off from scoring a dice match for Guerrilla Cricket, and I am pleased to say that it was actually quite a close match in the end. It shouldn't have been nowhere near close. I think at one point, excuse the names, but the Ginger Dreadmen were 9 wickets down and needed about 60 runs to win. And there was a bit of a rearguard action from Ryan Sidebottom. He got 64 off 18 balls and basically won the match, which was quite extraordinary. They beat the Wevo Shaughnessy 11. So yeah, it was quite a bit of fun this morning. I have to say, I didn't envisage that my first scoring game of the season would be a game of dice cricket sitting in my front room with Zoom, a bespoke scoring package designed for GC and using Play Cricket as a backup. But yeah, there you go. That was the first scoring game of the season. While it was 24 degrees outside, I was indoors scoring. As you do. Stay home and stay safe.
So this bespoke scoring package then, what's that like? Is it similar to anything you've used before?
It's a little bit similar to what I've used with Pitch Vision, but about 20 times better in the sense that it's far more intuitive, far more reactive. It's not as great as Play Cricket, but it's not designed to be really a scoring app. It's been sort of bespoke made for this match so that people who are watching it online can see what's going on with the game. And indeed, when you're scoring, in a sense, a mythical cricket match, and you've got your commentators saying that Ryan Sidebottom has done a sweep for 4 and it's gone over the boundary, they need to know that it's Ryan Sidebottom. So actually having a scorecard at the bottom, which is the updating as the dice are rolled, works well. But I mean, you can check it out on the YouTube page and also on our Facebook page at Guerrilla Cricket. So it's you can see how it all works and all goes. And I quite like the fact that it shows what's happened in the last 6 balls. So it sort of gives people a bit of an update on sort of what's happening, which I think is a good thing. So yeah.
Fantastic.
But it's nice to score. It was really nice just to be able to score a cricket match.
Yeah.
It sounds fascinating. I'll have to check that out on YouTube. You're right that I'm missing scoring as well. It's a great shame, but not a lot we can do about it. But there was a game of cricket in the UK yesterday. It happened in Guernsey, where I believe they haven't got as many cases, thankfully, of COVID-19 as the rest of the UK. And it was a T20 match, and it was actually to raise money for the COVID-19 appeal. It took place at the King George V ground in Castle, between Ollie Tapp's 11 and the Andy Cornford 11. Both of those people work for the Guernsey Cricket Board. I think one is the performance coach and the other is the head of cricket. And there's been a lot of talk in the last week because the government is slowly lifting restrictions on social distancing and sport, and I think a lot of people are just keen to get back to cricket and sport of all kinds. But certainly yesterday in the game they had still restrictions in place, so the players had restrictions placed on them. They weren't allowed to celebrate with each other. There were no high fives or touching of hands. That they weren't allowed to sort of interact in that way. They also didn't use the changing rooms. They came ready changed. So there was a lot less interaction. The players just sort of kept their distance on the pitch and played. But I'd be interested to know, firstly, who the scorers were, but then how they managed to score. Now, who the scorers were, I expected to be able to find from the scorecard, and there's a great scorecard. There's lots of information if you go on the Guernsey Cricket Board website, And on that scorecard, it lists the umpires' names, but sadly there wasn't even a space to put the scorers' names, let alone to see who they were. So have either of you sort of experienced that in other scorecards?
Certainly regularly that scorecards never have the scorers' names on there, despite the game not being able to take place without us. Certainly in Wisden, for example, if you look, there are no scorers listed for any games.
It's really quite sad that we are an integral part of the game and not mentioned.
People are given up an afternoon to score, and I think you pay the umpires, but seldom do scorers get paid, or it's just sort of taken for granted that someone will just have a tea and a beer at the end of the match if they drink, and you're just thinking, well, this is all very well, but actually they may not be standing or may not be prominent on the field to everybody, but they're still concentrating for long periods of time, sometimes in quite unfriendly conditions, especially if you're in the blazing sun. And it's, as Brian says, integral to the match. You need someone to keep a record of the score, and there should be a lot more respect and acknowledgement for the scorers out there. There really should be.
Absolutely.
I agree. So it would be really good if we could find out who the scorers were in that match yesterday. So if there's anybody listening from Guernsey who knows who scored that match yesterday, do let us know. And we will let you know if we can find that out for you. Also, I wondered what the conditions were like for them to score in, because there's a lot of talk about what needs to happen to get cricket being played again, and I'm wondering what's being thought about for scorers, because we normally sit in fairly small score boxes a lot of the time, certainly not 2 metres from our colleagues, and it's a long time to be sitting in those conditions. And I just wonder, maybe some scorers are a little apprehensive about being in an enclosed space with somebody else for a long period of time, and what maybe we need to consider that we need to do to get back to scoring.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of cases, as we all know, with shared score boxes with bags of sawdust, slip cradles, all kinds of things like that. And they're probably the last areas that are going to be cleaned. Whereas changing rooms, common areas, tea facility areas, should circumstances permit that to happen, they'll obviously be cleaned, ready for that. Whereas maybe scoring facilities, for example, if you're at a school, one place where I score is at a school, and I would suggest that probably doesn't get cleaned from the moment the term ends until we end back up there again.
Yeah, you're probably right, actually, because it's out of the school's normal hours where they would employ cleaners.
Yes, indeed.
There's also, it's not just the cricket match itself, it's actually how a scorer is going to get to matches, especially, so I score in London. To get to cricket matches, sometimes if it's a home match, I use public transport, which is not really advisable to use at the moment. So it's also the getting to the match as well, and how that's going to operate. And I really do hope, although I have a feeling we might be an afterthought and it'll be a case of using common sense, that there is some discussion, not just how the players are going to be able to play the match and what conditions there will be. I have actually sat in a meeting with an association of cricket officials for a county where there was quite a lot of discussion on how the umpires would be picked, because bear in mind, a lot of the umpires are over the age of 70. So, that comes under the vulnerable category, whether they're willing to go and umpire, the closeness where they're going to stand. But they've also got to realise that, scorers can kind of fall under the same bracket. Yeah. Is it, the position that they are able to score the match, get there and willing to do so? And I think everybody's treating these lifting of lockdown restrictions like it's Mardi Gras in the UK at the moment. And you're actually thinking, well, there's no vaccine, the infection rate is still high, use your common sense. And actually, a game of cricket is a game of cricket. And there's a life is far much more important than that. And if it means for 6 months that you don't do something that you like, but you mean you get to live another 60 odd years, crack on, or whatever, how many years, do you know what I mean? Because you're going to enjoy a lot more cricket. If you're trying to force something when you're not safe, well, don't be daft about it.
I totally agree with you.
I agree. Yeah, very much so. So back in episode 2, we briefly mentioned that the three of us work as part of a scoreboard team at Lord's. But I happen to know that you, Jules and Brian, also do similar at the Oval. Is that right?
Yes, indeed. Yes.
So while you're there, you will work alongside the official scorers, hopefully. Are you in close contact with them while you're there at the Oval?
Well, we are actually in the next box to them. Various hand signals take place between the two scorers.
Polite ones, I hope.
Well, the addition of 2 minutes onto the cut-off time is normally an interesting hand signal. But yes, we are in regular contact with them, certainly running between the two rooms to get, for example, the official DL calculations to be displayed on the board.
Interesting. So this week, Jules has been in contact with the Surrey First 11 scorer, Phil Makepeace, asking him lots of questions about what life is like at Surrey and how he became the Surrey First 11 scorer. So let's have a listen to that now. I don't like cricket.
Okay, so with me today we have Phil Makepeace. Phil, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi there, how you doing, Jules?
Yeah, I'm all good, thank you. I'm all good. It's a beautiful sunny day in May. So you're joining us today on Cricket Scorers Untallied. We just want to find out a little bit more about your background. So currently, what are you doing in relation to scoring, and then how did you get into cricket?
At the moment, I'm the first team scorer for Surrey, and before that, so this is my third season, or in theory, is my third season with Surrey. And before that, I was the sort of London scorer for Opta, doing the data for county and international cricket for 4 years before that.
Yeah, so just out of interest, who should you be scoring? So who was Surrey due to play at the moment?
The T20 was supposed to start tomorrow.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, we have just come out of the county window, the 4-day window, and the T20 stuff was supposed to start at some point tomorrow or this week. I think it was actually maybe the 29th it was supposed to start on a Friday, but that is obviously not happening. So
it's amazing how the weather's so good at the moment as well.
Of course,
like can't play cricket.
It's ridiculous, and I just remember you get all those Facebook memories of a year ago, 2 years ago, and of just wet outfields and these photos that you've taken from wet grounds and windy grounds and cold grounds, and having the heater on in late May at these outgrounds as well. It's that because last year, of course, was the World Cup, so there was lots of outgrounds being used.
So, Phil, how did you get into scoring? It's something that I've always wondered, and I don't think I've ever asked you.
Yeah, so it's the travails of the number 11 batsman, where I was the number 11 in my school team. I was number 11 in my club team. But actually what happened, the reason I really got into it was because when I was 14, 15, I wasn't able to play at all because I had a knee injury. That actually meant that I went onto a game in the Isle of Man, believe it or not, where my mates were playing. The British Chess Federation always used to play a game against a local side at the British Championships on the middle Sunday because it was a rest day. It was a 2-week tournament. I couldn't play because of my injury. And so they said, Phil, can you score? And I said, sure. And I did. A couple of years later, I moved to London to go to university and joined Highgate Cricket Club. And again, I was number 11 for the 4s and the 5s. Just retreat back into the pavilion and hope that I didn't have to get to bat so that the scorebook could be complete rather than having this thing where, I've done it beautifully for the first 9 wickets and then someone else has had to take over for my cameo and they'd inevitably ruin the book.
So you are scoring for, well, you're number 11 for Highgate. You're scoring and then hoping that you don't have to go in and bat, so the scorebook is complete. How did you then move from that? Obviously, we've got your university years. How did you move from that into Opta?
So, yeah, when I was 24 in 2013, I became fully self-employed as a chess coach after university. And it takes a little while to build up a business, of course. And so I saw an ad they were looking for cricket analysts for London. I got an interview and then they said, no, we don't want you. But what we'll do is we'll train you up anyway as like a little reserve. So I basically came third out of 2 places that they wanted to hire for.
Uh-huh.
So I only got a few gigs that year. I got I got one of the best ones probably. I got the England women's test at Wormsley.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah, that was nice. England lost that to India, unfortunately, but it meant that I spent a lovely 2 or 3 days with Sue Robinson and Vanessa Holiday. So I met them. That was fun. And
lovely ladies.
And then the bloke they'd hired to do London instead of me moved to New Zealand in the winter, as you do. So
Nice.
they said, Phil, would you like to join us for 2015? And I did. And that was that really. What Opta do is they provide all the scorecards and the stats that you'll see on places like the BBC website, ESPN Cricinfo. They'll provide things to newspapers, whoever wants it really, as well as the betting websites who are doing in-play things for both international and county cricket. And that's the main role really from a financial point of view.
And how does that work? As in, how do you actually score it?
Yes, well, you're scoring it exactly the same way. You've got your linears, you've got bespoke Opta software that would communicate things to these websites, communicate things to the betting companies, and you'd have a betting alert buttons that you could make sure that they suspend all the markets if something big's happened or is about to happen. So you're basically a third scorer, and you'd sit at most grounds with the other scorers. There's very few exceptions to that, mainly owing to space. The big one that you couldn't go in with the scorers was at Northampton, because Northampton's box is tiny. Yeah, be in the press box next door, and you can just run along, and Tony Kingston and the other Northants people were always very supportive of you just coming in, and if you needed to check a catcher or something, just knocking on the door and going, who was that? And that was never a problem. And Tony Kingston would always do you a little printout just to check that you had the right things at lunch and tea as well, which is very helpful.
That's kind.
I think during my Opta tenure, I think I went everywhere apart from Worcester, Durham, and Derby. I think that's right. I didn't go to Old Trafford with Opta, but I've since been there with Surrey. But those are still actually the 3 that I haven't been to as a scorer.
So moving on from that, you said that you started being the main scorer for Surrey 3 years ago. So how did that all come about?
What normally happens, of course, is that if the first team scorer retires, the second team scorer will be given first dibs, really. But in this case, both the first and second team scorers at Surrey retired at the same time because they were husband and wife. There was an application process, much the same, really, except that the Opta interview was much more cricket-based, which might sound strange, but the point is that if you are the Opta scorer, what you need to do is really know every player.
Yeah.
But all you need to do, if you're a home scorer, is know your players, in theory, because the other scorer can help you with that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the Opta one, there was a proper exam where you sort of asked to identify very obscure players from yesteryear, just to test that your knowledge of the game was there. But of course, after I'd had 3.5 years experience, there was no kind of doubt of my cricket credentials here. So the interview for Surrey was much more just person focused and person centered, and trying to make sure that I'd be a good fit within the existing setup, really, because that's it, really. You're there as part of the team. You're part of the match day process. They need to be able to trust you to be a professional. And yeah, I applied and I got it, much to my surprise. And that was a real. It's just been a real pleasure and a real honour to be a county's first-class scorer.
So for people listening to this podcast, I mean, we've got the range of scorers listening from all around the world. I think they'll always be sort of quite interested to understand what is your day like when you go and score for Surrey, but then also what is your day like when you go and score for an international test match at the Oval?
Well, let's do the toss day, I guess. So you get there about 2 hours beforehand. You go and see if there's been any team changes. So you'd be talking to Stewie or whomever about that. And then your main job really as a home scorer is to host the away scorer and host the Opta scorer. Provide hospitality to people who have come a long way to score to be your colleague for a few days. One of my responsibilities is to do the team sheet. So that's quite important not to make any mistakes there. And I do double check it with whoever the captain is for this match and the gaffer. And then then your role turns into one of being part of the officials team. So you're there at the toss with the umpires, with the the match referee or the cricket liaison officer.
And what does a cricket liaison officer do?
He's just the match referee. So
it
just does all this. Yeah, it just does all the same jobs as a match referee would do for an international game. For example, over when the Arrow came onto the field at the Oval 3 years ago, that would have been something that the CLO or the match referee would have had a big responsibility to play, just making sure that everyone was okay and working out what to do next, that kind of thing. At 10:30 when the toss happens, that's my next job, just kind of making sure that the umpires are we're all on the same page with what's happening with the toss and getting that reported. And yeah, from then on, you're in your scoring role, which does actually include the CLO slightly, because you need to, everything you produce on this new software on the PCS, they are using it too. So they're not scoring, of course, but they'll just get your feed, and anything that happens at all, they can put something in there that makes sure that the incident is reported, the incident is attached to the correct ball. So they're using PCS as well. So that's why and I think it's been a really good innovation, having it so that the scoring team are connected to the umpires in that respect, and insofar as everyone's working off the same script.
Yeah.
So they're reliant on me, they're also reliant on the analyst. So the person, at Surrey, it's Natalie Doyle. It's reliant on her getting the video stuff correct as well, because what you can do in PCS is you can click on a ball and it will show you the delivery. So it all kind of matches up. So there's all this input from the analyst, from myself, and then I'm being supported as the lead scorer at the Oval by the support scorer, the away scorer, by the Opta scorer, by the scoreboard tech.
Yeah.
And all of these things go towards creating this story, and that's what you want.
Yeah.
We're all one big team, and there's never been any problems since I've been Surrey scorer where we've had enormous discrepancies, enormous disagreements over the score, because what happens at the end of every over on PCS is that it will tell you if there's a discrepancy, and then it's very easy to sort out one over.
Yeah.
So it's always been just quite a nice little environment, because you are there as a team, and realising that is really important. The rest of my day is just scoring the game, and at lunch and tea, I will liaise with the CLO about over rates if it's a first class game. So that's something that I'm keeping tabs on. We saw it in that Arrow match where, because of the state of play, Middlesex lost 2 points for being 2 overs down when the match was abandoned, and they went down by 2 points to Division 2. It's a big deal, and that's one of my main responsibilities to the team, is not to try and game it, but to just ensure that everything is fair.
Yeah.
So what I do is I time every over, as well as sort of keeping the overall minutes records, so that if we are -3, -4, it's possible for the management to see who is taking the longest over their overs and whether something needs to be done about that. Yeah, so that's lunch, tea, and then after the game, we just go and make sure that's all correct, and that's it, really.
And how's that different? So you talked about like a day for scoring for Surrey there. What's it like when there's an international match on at the Oval? How does that work for a scorer?
Very similar, actually, except that the responsibility to the team doesn't exist. You have the responsibility to the game, and you have the responsibility to yourself and to the public. Insofar as if you get distracted and you miss umpire signals, that's on TV. That's going to millions of people. That hasn't happened yet, fortunately.
Yeah.
The way it works at the Oval is that the scorers and the third umpire and the video umpire and the match referee are very close quarters. You might have some liaison with the third umpire, not during the game, just generally because they're around, so you see them.
Yeah.
Particularly like it when Bruce Oxenford is the third ump, because he's a terrific chap, and he's always good for a bit of a natter. And you often see during the drinks breaks, that's the other thing, you have drinks breaks at internationals, and you'll often see the both scorers, the Opta scorer, third ump, and the match ref all dashing to the loo at the same time.
So you, in all your sort of scoring career, be that at school, be that Highgate, be it Opta, be it Surrey, be that international, of all of that, I'll put you really on the spot here. What's been your standout moment as a scorer?
Okay, scorer's moment, probably that first day at Wormsley, just feeling part of something for the first time. It really helped that it was not quite a gentle introduction to the world of professional scoring, insofar as Vanessa and Sue are just lovely, lovely people. And they were very supportive at all times, particularly at Wormsley. You don't have an internet connection, really, so I was actually doing half of that by text to the office, the Opta office in Leeds, because that was really the only match I did that year as the reserve Opta scorer. And it meant that when they did ask me to do it in 2015, I knew that it was absolutely something I still wanted to do. In terms of cricket, probably the England-India fifth test at the Oval, which had Cook getting to his 100 with a 5 in his final test, which was quite something. That was something that you're not gonna have a lot. And the same test match, the test match ended with Jimmy Anderson breaking the fast bowler record, breaking McGrath's record with the final wicket, and that was just absolutely perfect. You couldn't have had a better week. And from a personal point of view as well, during that match, my now fiance's parents had come to day 3, and I had taken them out to dinner afterwards and asked them if I could marry her. So that was just a very special week for me in a lot of ways. Yeah,
that was quite the test match, and indeed quite the test match for you personally as well. So, Phil, a bit like everybody at the moment, how are you biding your time as a scorer before we next get back into the scorebox?
I'm happy to say that the chess business, which I started in 2013, and the thing that needed supplementing in the first place, did take off eventually. So actually what happens in the summer now is I really do have two full-time jobs at the same time. That's actually just what I'm doing now. I'm very sad to be missing the cricket, but I am also making the most of not having to do 2 full-time jobs at the same time.
So, Phil, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been really interesting just to learn about your journey through scoring, but also just some bits and pieces along the way of some of the nuances, either scoring for Opta or from Surrey, and also just that sort of personal touch as well, and understanding what are those sort of key moments that have been in your scoring career. So thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. Thanks, Jules.
It's time for drinks. And now we're back.
So thank you for that, Jules. That was really interesting. And Jules, last week you posed us a question in Ask the Scorer at the end of the episode. So could you ask that question again, and maybe we'll be able to answer it for you?
Yeah, sure. So we see some amazing fielding happening on the boundary to say stop a boundary. The fielder throws it in and they manage to get a run out. But the only way to get the run out is because someone else is standing at the stumps, be it the bowler or the wicketkeeper, who actually break the stumps. So who do you attribute the run out to in those scenarios?
That is a very interesting question.
Indeed.
To which I think we won't get a definitive answer, because that is statistical information and not included in the laws of cricket. The laws of cricket direct us as to things like are runs scored of this type of dismissal, and how a dismissal is affected, but they don't take any notice of statistical information. And I don't always remember recording that. Do you?
I must admit that it's only been in the last probably 7 to 8 years where I must admit, prompted by my fellow scorer, who said, "Oh, did you see who fielded that?" When I was taught to score a long time ago now, I hasten to add that I wasn't advised that I needed to put that in the scorebook. I was always trained to concentrate on the middle as to what happened there. I know people will say what's the difference between that and catches, which is a very good question. But certainly I was never prompted to put the fielder's name in the scorebook.
No, even for catches, it's statistical information, but I think catches have been recorded for longer, because you see that in sort of end of season summaries, how many catches did a player take. But you see how many run-outs they affected a lot less. So you're right, it's more recent information. And because of that, we don't really have an answer for you. Now, if you look at the media, they will always credit the outfielder, the person out in the field somewhere who threw the ball in. And I think it's assumed that they've done most of the work. They've probably run to get the ball. They've done a good throw. But there are times when they happen to be in the right place. They just lobbed the ball in, and the wicketkeeper has had to make a fantastic dive to get the ball, or another player has had to make a really good stop to get the ball and then take the bails off. So technically, I would say it's the person who breaks the stumps who should get credited with the dismissal.
It would be interesting to see who has been credited for the run-outs in the Super Over in the World Cup final, for example.
It's a great show.
It will. And I think it may differ depending on where you look.
Indeed.
I think if you were in the ground at the time, the fielder's name that appeared on the scoreboard may well be different to the one that appears in the newspapers or the websites. Because,
Absolutely.
as I say, the media always credit the outfielder, whereas I believe that at Lord's, it will be the person who breaks the stumps that will get the credit on the scoreboard.
Yes, indeed.
It is a tricky question, and I get asked as a tutor of new scorers, I get asked this question quite a lot. And it's really difficult for somebody to have to make that decision. Should it really be the scorer's decision to decide who's done the best fielding? Would you sometimes credit the outfielder and sometimes credit the person who broke the stumps, depending on how much work they'd done? It's a really tricky one to decide, and not fair, I think, making the scorer answer that question. And as Brian, as you said, I train the scorers to look at the centre of the game, not to look at the fielders. You can always ask who took a catch, but you can't ever work out how many runs were scored if you miss it. You need to be watching that centre part of the ground as a scorer. You should be watching the batsman running up and down and the umpires for signals. So you're not going to necessarily know who did the most work, because you might well have missed the wonderful run round and dive on the boundary to stop the ball.
Especially as we know that not all score boxes you can see the whole of the playing field.
also, what would you do then if 3 people are involved, which they could be? So if somebody makes a fantastic stop and just stops the ball from going over the rope, but somebody else picks it up and throws it in, and then that person throws the ball into somebody else who breaks the wicket, now you've got 3 people involved. Who are you going to pick out of those? Jules, this is a tricky question.
Absolutely.
I favour who break the stumps every time, because there is only ever one of those people. And if they didn't break the stumps, then there wouldn't be a run out. So that's going to be my answer, but that's an opinion, and I would say there is no definitive answer.
Thank you. What about yourself, Brian?
That's a very good question. It's a very subjective thing to evaluate as a scorer. I must admit, it can seem a little wrong that the fielder or the keeper or the bowler who breaks the wickets is the person who's credited it, when sometimes that is very routine, and it's actually the quality of the return by the fielder that actually makes the wicket happen.
Do you not get assists in cricket? And if not, why not?
Again, this is statistical information, and when you've got a scoreboard without much space on it, or a scorebook without much space in it in the how out column, it's tricky enough to write in run out, and especially if somebody's got a double barreled name, run out by the person's name, without then trying to fit 3 more fielders in with him or her. But in the latest scoring software that we're using, Play Cricket Scorer Professional, there are 3 fields now for crediting assistant fielders. And you have to choose the primary fielder, and that's the person who gets accredited with the dismissal. Not the bowler, but with the field inside of it. And then you have up to 3 more fielders who you can credit as assistant fielders, and that's for scorecard information only. So you can put their names in, you can select them from the list of players, but the information only gets printed on that scorecard. It doesn't go anywhere. They don't get a tick to say that they affected a run out. With modern technology, we are starting to record those more. So we need a question for next week. Does anybody have an Ask the Scorer question?
I've got one that we could discuss. There are several ways that penalty runs can occur, especially in the modern game, with the change of rules and regulations over the past few seasons. Which ones of those will not count as a ball in the over?
Ooh, yeah, that's a good question. We'll have to go and do some research, I think, and come back to you next week on that. So don't forget that if you have a question for Ask the Scorer, you can send it to our email address, which is cricketscorersuntallied@gmail.com. And also, you could send it to our Twitter account, which is @cricketscorers1, which will then reach us at Cricket Scorers Untallied, and you can then get your question answered on air. Now, just before we go, we did have a picture of a scorebook posted on our Twitter feed from Mike Turner, and that picture was taken from, it was a still from the video called The Test, which he'd been watching, which was about cricket in Australia, particularly a test match between Australia and India. And in this scorebook, the boundaries had been all done in red, apart from one. And there was one blue for amongst all the other red boundaries, whereas most of the entries were done in black. And Mike asked us why this particular boundary was in blue.
The only thing I can suggest, or was it an all run for as opposed to a boundary for, is one suggestion.
I thought that too. So I did a little bit of research, and from the commentary that I could find on it, then no, it mentioned that the ball had crossed the rope and that it was a boundary 4. So I believe that the answer to that was no. Interestingly enough, though, if it had been an all-run 4, why do you think they would have wanted to do it in another colour?
Certain scorers and scoreboards, for example, count boundaries. I'm not sure of the existing software at Lords, but I know the old software at Lords, if it wasn't marked as a boundary 4 and it was marked as a 4 all run, then the figures of 4s and 6s, for example, 4s were assumed to be boundaries and not the numbers of 4s.
Yeah, there is. It's a bit like the run-out question. We're coming back to statistical information. So should an all-run 4 be a boundary 4 or not? So yes, most people would exclude it from the list, the number of boundaries that batsman had scored. So I think we can't find an actual answer just by looking at the scorecard or looking at the commentary for the match. I think once again we would need to know who the scorer was and contact the scorer to find that out. But it's just possible that the scorer picked up the wrong colour pen and that it's an error, because we are human, we do make mistakes in the scorebook, and they might not have wanted to have written over something in the scorebook which wasn't totally important. It's much nicer to leave it in its original pen, even if it's the wrong colour. So at the moment, Mike, that's the only answer that I have for you. So thank you, Jules and Brian. Hopefully we'll be back again this time next week with more from Cricket Scorers Untallied. So thanks, Jules.
Thanks, everyone. Stay safe and well.
And thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
And thank you and goodbye from me, Sue.